My mother kicked me out at 18 with nothing. 10 years later, she came back homeless, begging to stay with me. But I slammed the door and gave them their own medicine. I'm 28 years old. I work in tech, making more than my parents made together in their entire lives. And 3 months ago, I closed the door in their faces when they came to ask me to let them live with me, because they lost everything. And no, I don't feel bad about it. Not at all. Even though half the world tells me I should. The thing is, they kicked me out of the house when I turned 18, literally told me I had 1 month to get out, and now that they're on the street, they expect me to rescue them like nothing ever happened. But let me tell you the whole story from the beginning, because there's a lot to explain. I grew up in a house where I was basically a burden, an expense that my parents tolerated because legally they had to until I turned 18. My father, Thomas, worked in construction and always had that tough guy attitude of someone who doesn't need anyone. You know, one of those who thinks showing emotions is for weak people. My mother, Catherine, was a stay-at-home mom, but not the warm type who bakes you cookies. More like the obsessive type who cleans the same surface 5 times and makes you feel like your existence dirties her perfect house. There were never hugs, never that whole, I'm proud of you or I love you thing, nothing. It was like living in a hotel where you pay rent with your mere presence and you better not bother the management. For as long as I can remember, they made it clear that at 18 I had to leave, like it was an expiration date marked on a calendar. My father said it all the time when I was like 14, 15 years old. Like, when you turn 18, this is over. You're going to have to figure out life like everyone else. And my mother just nodded while folding clothes with that military precision she had for everything. I thought maybe they were exaggerating, that it was their weird way of motivating me or something. But looking back, I should have realized they were serious. They wouldn't let me work during high school because, according to them, that they was going to affect my grades. But it's not like they cared that much about my grades either. I think they just didn't want to deal with driving me back and forth from a job. So I got to 18 with no work experience, no money saved, basically nothing. On my 18th birthday, which was a regular Tuesday, in April I think, or maybe March. I'm not sure. My father came home from work and told me we needed to sit down and talk. I remember my mother was washing dishes even though they were already clean, that nervous thing she did when she knew something was about to happen. My father sat in his chair, that horrible brown leather chair that nobody else could use, and dropped the speech he'd probably been practicing. Basically, he told me that I was legally an adult now, that they had fulfilled their obligation to raise me for 18 years, and that I had exactly 1 month to find a job, find somewhere to live, and move out. 1 month. 30 days to get everything I needed to survive as an independent adult when they had never taught me anything about that. I just sat there trying to process what I had just heard. Like, are you actually kicking me out on my birthday? I asked if he was joking, and my father looked at me with that serious face he always had and said, no, that this was best for me, that I needed to learn to fend for myself, that they at my age were already working and paying their own bills. My mother said absolutely nothing, just kept scrubbing those dishes that were already shining. I tried to reason with them, told them I had just graduated high school 2 weeks ago, that I had no money, that I had no work experience because they never let me work. But my father just repeated the same thing. 1 month. And after that, I wasn't welcome in their house. Those next 4 weeks were literally the worst of my life up to that point. I went out looking for work like crazy, filling out applications everywhere, supermarkets, clothing stores, fast food restaurants, whatever. Most, I didn't even call me back because I had no experience in anything. I finally got hired at a supermarket as a cashier, making minimum wage, which back then was like $7.25 an hour or something. Total misery. I worked 35 hours a week because the manager didn't want to give me 40 full so he wouldn't have to give me benefits, typical. With that salary, I had to find somewhere to live in a city where the cheapest rent was like $600 a month plus deposit. I looked for apartments everywhere, and the only thing I could afford was a horrible studio in the worst part of town. Like that building where you hear neighbors fighting at 3 inches the morning and the stairwell smells like things you don't want to identify. It was literally one room, with a kitchenette that was basically an old stove and a stained sink, a bathroom that was disgusting, and a window that looked out onto an alley where there was always someone yelling. I paid $550 a month plus $100 deposit that I had to borrow from a friend from school because my parents flat out refused to help me with that. I remember my father told me something like, if I lend you money, you'll never learn, as if he was doing me a favor by basically leaving me on the street. The day I moved out, which was exactly 30 days after my birthday because my parents counted every damn day. I rented a truck for $50 that left me almost broke. I packed my stuff, which was basically clothes, some books, my old laptop from school, and that was it. My parents didn't even help me load the boxes. My father was watching TV and my mother was cleaning my room before I finished getting everything out. Like she couldn't wait for me to leave so she could disinfect the space I had occupied. There was no goodbye, no take care, nothing. I just left and they closed the door and probably celebrated that they didn't have to spend money on me anymore. The first months in that apartment were brutal, and when I say brutal, I'm not exaggerating, at all. I worked my 35 hours at the supermarket and made like $1,000 a month before taxes. After taxes, I had like $850 or something. Out of that, I paid $550 for rent, like $80 for utilities if I was lucky and didn't use the heater much, $50 for public transportation because I didn't have a car, and I had like $170 a month left for food and everything else. I basically survived on rice, beans, cheap pasta, and whatever I could get on discount at the supermarket where I worked. I lost like 15 pounds in those first 3 months because I literally didn't have enough money to eat well. But the thing is, I knew I couldn't stay like that forever. Like either I did something to improve my situation or I was going to end up trapped in that poverty cycle my whole life. So I enrolled in the local community college to take night classes, paying with student loans that I knew I'd be paying off for years, but I had no other choice. I started studying something related to technology, because I had heard those jobs paid well and you didn't need a degree from an expensive university to get them, at least not at first. That meant my schedule was working at the supermarket from 7 inches the morning to 3 inches the afternoon, then running to catch the bus to get to community college for classes from 5 to 9 at night, and then studying until like 1 inch the morning. I did that for 2 full years. 2 years of working and studying nonstop, no vacations, not going out anywhere because I didn't have time or money. My social life was zero. My friends from high school went off to real universities or started their own lives, and I was here basically surviving. During all that time, my parents didn't call me once, not to ask how I was, not to see if I was still alive, nothing. It was like I had never existed for them. Once I ran into them at the supermarket where I worked. I think it was like 8 months after I left, and my mother saw me, clearly recognized me, and literally turned around and went down another aisle. She didn't even say hi. That hurt more than I want to admit, but it also made me angry, like a cold anger that made me want to prove to them that I was going to make it without them. When I turned 21, I already had my associate degree from community college, and I transferred to State University to get my bachelor's. By then I had gotten a second job on weekends at a restaurant as a waitress, which was exhausting but gave me tips I desperately needed. I was literally working 60 hours a week between both jobs and taking full-time classes. I don't know how I didn't have a nervous breakdown, honestly. I guess it was pure adrenaline and stubbornness. I remember my Aunt Sarah, who was like the only person in the family who occasionally remembered I existed, called me once during that time and I told her how I was doing, and she went silent for like 10 seconds and then said something like, "Your parents should be helping you." And I just laughed because what was the point of saying anything? The next 3 years were more of the same. Work, school, sleep little, eat badly, stress over every cent I spent. There were moments when I thought about quitting. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I killing myself studying if I'm going to end up poor and alone anyway? But something in me, I don't know if to call it pride or stubbornness or what, wouldn't let me give up. I think part of me wanted to prove to my parents that I could do it without them, that their rejection wasn't going to destroy me. Another part of me just wanted to have a better life than the one they gave me. I wanted to have enough money to not have to count every dollar. I wanted to live in a place where I wasn't afraid of getting robbed. I just wanted to be okay. I finally graduated when I was 24, with my bachelor's degree in computer science and a decent GPA considering I was working full-time while studying. I started sending out applications for real jobs that paid real salaries, and after like 50 interviews and a bunch of rejections, I got my first job in tech at a mid-sized company. The salary was $55,000 a year, which for me, who had been living on $12,000 a year for the last 6 years, was basically winning the lottery. I remember when I saw the offer, I cried, like really cried, for the first time in years, because I finally felt like all the suffering had been worth it. With that job, I was able to move to a decent apartment. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe, in an area where I didn't hear police sirens every night. I could buy new furniture instead of secondhand stuff. I could buy real food and not just the cheapest thing I could find. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living in constant survival mode. I kept working hard, obviously, learning everything I could, getting additional certifications, networking, all those things they tell you to do to advance your career. And it worked. Because in 2 years, I got promoted and my salary went up to $75,000. And then a year later, I changed companies and they paid me $95,000. When I was 26, I did something I never thought I could do. I bought a house. Well, technically the bank bought the house and I have a giant mortgage, but it's mine, in my name. It's a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it's perfect for me. It has a small yard, a garage, windows that close properly, a roof that doesn't leak when it rains. All those basic things I never had. The day they gave me the keys, I sat on the floor of the empty living room and thought about that one 8-year-old girl who was kicked out of her house with nothing. And I felt proud of myself. Like, really proud of everything I had achieved completely alone. During all these years, from when I left my parents' house until I bought my own house, they never contacted me. Not once. I didn't contact them either. Because honestly, I didn't want to know anything about people who had treated me like a burden they couldn't wait to get rid of. Occasionally, my Aunt Sarah would send me a message asking how I was, and I'd answer politely, but I never asked her about my parents. I guess I assumed they were fine, living their life without me just like I was living my life without them. I was wrong. Turns out they weren't fine at all. About 6 months ago, my Aunt Sarah called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was at my house organizing some things, and her voice sounded weird, like worried and nervous. She told me she had to tell me something about my parents, and I automatically tensed up because I knew it wasn't going to be good news. Turns out my father had put almost all their savings into a construction business with a friend who scammed them. They lost all the money, got into debt up to their necks, and ended up losing their house. They had been living in their car for like 3 months, going from parking lot to parking lot, using public bathrooms, basically homeless. My aunt was trying to help them, but she didn't have much money either and already had her own family to support. My first reaction, and I know this sounds horrible, but it's the truth, was like, and what do I care? These people threw me out on the street when I was 18 with no resources, no help, let me struggle alone for years, never cared to know if I was alive or dead. And now they expected me to feel sorry because things went bad for them. My aunt told me my parents wanted my phone number to talk to me, and I told her clearly, no, that I didn't want to know anything about them. She tried to do that whole speech about they're your family, they need help, you have to forgive, all that stuff. But I just told her I was sorry about their situation, but I didn't owe them anything after how they treated me. She got a little upset, but eventually said she understood and that was that. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday, around 8 at night, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I looked out the window and almost had a heart attack when I saw my parents standing there. They looked bad, honestly, much older than I remembered, with wrinkled clothes, my father with a grown beard, my mother with messy hair. They had clearly been having a rough time. I opened the door but didn't invite them in, just stood there in the doorway waiting for them to say something. My father started talking in that voice that was trying to sound humble, but you could tell it was hard for him, saying they had heard I was doing well, that I had a nice house, that they had been going through hard times and needed a place to stay temporarily, just a few weeks until they sorted out their situation. I looked at them and felt something weird, like a mix of anger and nothing at the same time, like when you see strangers asking you for something. My mother started crying, which I had never seen her do, saying they were sorry, that they had made mistakes, that I was their daughter and they needed my help. And I just thought about that one, 8-year-old girl knocking on doors, looking for work, sleeping in that horrible apartment, eating rice with salt because she had no money for anything else, crying alone at night, wondering why her parents didn't love her. I thought about all those times I needed help and they weren't there, all those times I felt completely alone in the world, how I had to build my life from scratch with no support. I told them no, simple and clear, that they couldn't stay in my house temporarily or permanently. My father started with that tone of, I'm your father, you owe me respect, and something in me broke. I told him that he kicked me out of his house when I was 18 without any consideration, that he literally left me on the street to figure things out on my own, that he never worried about me once in the last 10 years, and that now that it was his turn to be on the street, it wasn't. My problem. My mother kept crying, saying they were my family. And I told her that family doesn't do what they did to me, that I had to learn to survive alone because they decided I was a burden they wanted to get rid of. My father got furious, started yelling that I was ungrateful, that they raised me for 18 years and I owed them something, that what kind of daughter leaves her parents on the street. And I yelled back at him, which I had never done. I yelled that what kind of parents throw their daughter out on the street the day she turns 18, that they never loved me, that I was always a nuisance to them, and that now that they were in their 60 seconds and screwed, they couldn't expect me to rescue them. I told them to have the same strength they told me I needed when they kicked me out, to fend for themselves like they forced me to do, and I closed the door in their faces. I heard them yelling outside for like 10 minutes before they left. After that, they started calling me like crazy. My father, my mother, leaving me voicemails that ranged from begging to aggressive, text messages at all hours. I blocked them both. Then they started using my aunt's phone to call me, and I had to tell her that if she kept allowing that I was going to block her too. Some distant cousins I didn't even know well sent me messages saying I was cruel, that family helps each other, that my parents were suffering. Especially one cousin, Daniel, who hadn't even talked to me in years, sent me a long message saying I was selfish, that I had a house with extra rooms and my parents were on the street. How could I sleep peacefully knowing that? I answered him with the whole story of how my parents treated me, and he never responded. About a month after that, I received a legal paper at my door. My parents had hired a lawyer and were citing I don't know what filial responsibility laws, basically saying I was legally obligated to support them because they were my parents and they were in need. I'm little scared because I didn't know those laws existed. So I hired my own lawyer, which cost me like $2,000 in consultation. My lawyer investigated and told me that although those laws exist in some states, in ours they don't apply the way my parents thought, and that besides, the fact that they voluntarily ended the relationship with me when I turned 18 and never supported me after made their case basically impossible to win. My lawyer sent them a very formal letter explaining all this and basically telling them to stop harassing me or we were going to seek a restraining order. Their lawyer, who was probably charging them money they didn't have, apparently told them they had no case, and that's where the legal matter died. But the family harassment didn't die. I kept getting messages from different relatives saying I was a bad person, that I was going to regret it, that blood is thicker than water and all that shit. The funny thing is that none of those relatives were offering to help my parents themselves. They just wanted me to do it. It's been like 3 months since I closed the door on them, and I don't know exactly where they are now. My aunt told me the last time we talked that they found a shelter where they can stay, but the situation is still bad. Part of me feels bad for them because nobody deserves to be homeless, especially at that age. But the other part, the bigger part, is still angry about everything they did to me. It's not just that they kicked me out when I turned 18, it's that they never cared about me. They never really loved me. I was always an obligation for them, and nothing more. And now they want me to forget all that because they're in trouble. Last week I received a small package at my door. It had no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting on the address. Inside was an old photo of when I was like 5 years old. I'm in the yard of the house where I grew up, smiling at the camera, and a 2-page handwritten, a letter from my mother. The letter basically said that she knew they had made mistakes, that they weren't the best parents, that if they could turn back time they would do things differently, that they missed me and wanted to have a relationship with me even if it was just talking from time to time, that they understood I didn't want to help them financially, but at least give them a chance to be part of my life. My father had signed at the bottom too. I read the letter like 3 times trying to feel something, trying to find some part of me that wanted to forgive them or give them another chance. But all I felt was emptiness, like when you look at something that doesn't mean anything to you anymore. I put the letter and the photo in a drawer and there they are. I didn't throw them away, but I haven't taken them out again either. I don't know if I'll ever answer. Honestly, I don't think so. Maybe I'm a bad person for that. Maybe I should be more compassionate. But I already spent enough emotional energy on people who never spent any on me. Now I'm 28. My life is good. I work in an area. I like making good money. I have my own house, which is my safe space. I have some friends I made at work. Basically, I built a life from scratch. That's completely mine. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if my parents had supported me even a little when I was 18, if they had let me stay at home while I studied, if they had given me even a little financial or emotional help. It probably would have been easier. I probably wouldn't have suffered so much. but I also think that maybe I wouldn't be the person I am now. Someone who knows she can survive anything because she already survived the worst alone. I don't regret closing the door on them, and that's what surprises me most about all this. I thought maybe I was going to feel guilty afterwards, that I was going to have sleepless nights thinking about them on the street. But no, I sleep perfectly fine. I feel like I finally gave them a taste of their own medicine, that they experienced what it feels like to be alone and without support like they made me feel. Maybe that makes me vindictive or resentful, I don't know. But it's how I feel, and I don't have the energy anymore to pretend I feel something else.